You ever hear of a road that wasn't there yesterday? One that shows up just for you even when your GPS says there's nothing there? Yeah, neither did I. Until I took exit 0. So picture this, right? It's late, real late. I'm talking. That weird dead zone between night and morning, around 2:30 a.m. That time when the world's quiet enough to feel haunted, and your brain starts drifting in and out of autopilot. I was somewhere in Nevada, hauling it back east after a job fell through. One of those trips where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Late payments, bad leads, and a motel bed that felt like sleeping on a sack of bricks. I had a full EEP tank, a half-eaten bag of sour cream and onion chips riding shotgun, and a crusty coffee cup in the holder that had seen better days. The only radio station I could get out there was some faint Christian broadcast mixed with static and the occasional sharp pop, like someone whispering through a mouthful of bees. Highway 50. They call it the loneliest road in America, and let me tell you, they're not kidding. Just miles of pale blacktop stretching dead straight into nothing. Sand, scrub, the shadows of hills on the horizon. No lights, no gas stations, no traffic. Just that creeping sensation that if you broke down, no one was coming. I'd passed the last town over an hour ago. Some no-name speck with a single gas pump, 2 shuttered diners and a motel that looked like it was auditioning to be in a horror movie. After that, nothing. Not even roadkill. Just me, the dark, and the low hypnotic hum of my tires. You know that sound? That soft, steady thrum that starts to feel like it's not really coming from the road anymore? Like it's inside your ears. Your head. After a while it doesn't sound like tires at all, it sounds like whispering. I should have stopped, pulled over and caught a nap. But you know how it is. You're tired, but you think, just a few more miles. You convince yourself. There's something ahead, a diner, a rest stop, a town you don't remember. Something, anything. And then I saw it, an exit. It came out of nowhere, lit up in the reach of my headlights. One of those green reflective signs, the kind you see 1,000 times and forget. Only this one didn't. Have a name. No city center, no Route 83 north, no mileage listed, just 2 words. Exit 0. I frowned. Slowed down. I knew that wasn't on the map. I had the GPS mounted right there on the dash, and it showed a long grey road stretching into oblivion. According to it, there shouldn't be another turnoff for 40 miles. But there it was. The exit looked freshly paved. Smooth asphalt, clean white lines. It sloped gently off to the right and down, like it was bowing into the earth. I don't know why, but it gave me this weird chill, like the mouth of a cave, or the throat of something that wanted to swallow me. Still, I slowed down, rubberneck curiosity. That itch you get in your brain when something doesn't add up. I thought, maybe it's a shortcut, maybe it's a new road. Maybe I'm more tired than I thought. But here's the thing. Curiosity's a bastard, and sometimes when you scratch it, bed bites back. So yeah, I took it, tapped the brake, turned the wheel, and that's when everything went sideways. The moment my tires touched the off-ramp, I felt it, like a pressure change. Like the whole world just shifted. My ears popped like I'd gone up a mountain too fast. The static on the radio cut out completely, just dead air. I checked the rearview mirror and saw the highway still behind me. For a few seconds, then it was gone. Gone like it had never been there. I blinked, looked again. No highway, no sign, no desert, just thick black trees. Where there shouldn't be trees, the air got heavier, colder, the kind of cold that crawls down your neck and settles in your bones. I eased off the gas, heart thumping, knuckles tight on the wheel. The road ahead was wrong. It looked ancient, narrow, cracked and broken, like no one had driven it in years. Dead leaves covered the edges, no lights, no painted lines anymore. The only thing marking the path was the faint glint of my headlights, and even those didn't seem to stick, like the darkness ahead of me was too thick, too deep. It didn't reflect. It absorbed. The shadows weren't just shadows, they felt alive, watching, waiting, and that's when the car stopped. I didn't brake, I didn't shift, it just stopped. I pressed the gas, engine revved, tried reverse, nothing. The tires spun, like I was stuck on ice. No traction, no movement, like the car was being held in place by invisible hands. And that's when I noticed something else. I wasn't alone. I sat there, hands locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles going white. The engine still purred beneath me, low and menacing like some kind of caged animal ready to snap. The headlights barely pierced the darkness, only lighting up a few feet of cracked road before the void swallowed them whole. It was as if the night had been sucked into some black abyss that no light could escape. And then it hit me, the silence. It was so thick, so oppressive, it felt like the world itself had gone mute. No wind, no insects buzzing or chirping, not even the usual rustle of leaves or the hum of distant traffic, nothing but that hum of my own car and the oppressive stillness around me. I cracked the window just a sliver, hoping for some kind of noise. Even a slight breeze would have been enough, but nope. All I got was a breath of cold air that made my skin prickle. Nothing, like the universe itself had decided to hold its breath, waiting for something. Or maybe it was waiting for me. That's when I heard it snap, not loud, not sharp. But in a silence like that, a tiny twig snapping sounds like someone firing a shot right next to your ear. My head snapped to the side, eyes scanning the dark trees to my right. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, half hoping. It was just a deer, a rabbit, maybe some small animal getting too curious. Snap. Closer now. My pulse quickened. I flicked on the high beams, the headlights cutting through the dark like a knife. The trees in front of me loomed even bigger, more twisted, like gnarled hands reaching out to grab me. But nothing moved, no rustling, no scurrying, just the woods. But there was something off about them, something that didn't sit right, and then I saw it, movement. It was barely a blur, something shifting between two thick trunks, just on the edge of my vision. My head jerked toward it, heart pounding in my chest, but by the time I focused, nothing. It was gone, disappeared. I told myself it was nothing. Just a shadow, a trick of the light, maybe. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Yeah, that had to be it. But something twisted in my gut, tight and cold. That feeling you get when you know you're not imagining things. You know something is out there. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. No turning back now. I put the car back in drive and pressed the pedal down slowly. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to creep forward, to put more distance between me and the trees. The road ahead curved, disappearing into the forest, like it was leading me into a tunnel. Part of me hoped it was a tunnel, a dark, claustrophobic passage that would spit me out somewhere familiar, anywhere but these woods. As I drove further, the trees started to close in on both sides. At first it was gradual, almost comforting, but then they started crowding the road, too close, too fast. They leaned in, their branches heavy and low, stretching across like twisted fingers reaching for the sky. I could hear them scraping along. The roof now. That dry, brittle scritch-scritch sound. Ever heard that? Like fingernails on a chalkboard. It makes your skin crawl, doesn't it? The sound grew louder, and it felt like the trees were pressing in, wanting to trap me in the dark. My breath caught in my throat, my eyes darting around, looking for something, anything that would reassure me. I reached out and flicked off the radio, not that it was doing anything but filling the car with static. But as soon as I turned the dial, the static didn't stop. It changed. Whispers. Barely audible at first, but it was unmistakable. Low, breathy murmurs, like someone was trying to talk from inside the dashboard. I couldn't make out words, but the tone, it was too alive. Like they were speaking straight to me in some language I couldn't understand. I froze. No, no. That couldn't be real. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it, but the whispers only grew louder, more frantic. Like whoever or whatever was on the other end was desperate to get my attention. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, something darted across the road. It was fast, real fast, too fast. A blur of fur and crooked limbs, low to the ground, maybe 4 or 5 legs. Hell, it was hard to even count. It shot across from the left side of the road to the right like it was being chased by something. My heart hammered in my chest as I slammed the brakes, the tires screeching, locking up. I threw my hands out instinctively, as if they could protect me from whatever nightmare was lurking in front of me. The headlights cut through the night, and for a fraction of a second, They caught something. Two eyes. Yellow, glowing. And they weren't blinking, not even once. They just stared at me, piercing through the dark like twin lanterns. But there was something else, something that sent a shiver through my bones. The eyes weren't just watching. They were testing me, measuring me, like they knew exactly who I was, exactly where I was. I didn't breathe. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they were gone. Poof. Back into the trees, into the black. I blinked, shook my head, but the eyes were still there, burned into my vision. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. And then the whispers? They got louder, more urgent, like something or someone was desperately trying to get through, fighting with itself, arguing in tones I couldn't quite understand. The words collided into each other like static on crack, but it felt wrong. Every syllable felt jagged, like it was supposed to be something else, something important. I couldn't take it. I yanked the key from the ignition. Silence. Absolute, complete silence. No more whispers, no more static, no more breathy murmurs clawing at my skull. But the eyes, they wouldn't go away. They still burned there, deep in my brain. That's when I felt it. Something shifted, something moved, behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. My stomach churned. I didn't want to look. You ever feel that? The part of your brain that whispers, "Don't look, don't look. If you don't look, maybe it's not real." But then, like an idiot, I did. Slowly, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Nothing visible, anyway. The back seat was empty. Just the usual mess of fast food wrappers, an old jacket and a half-empty water bottle. But the seatbelt, it was stretched, pulled tight, like someone had just yanked it. I felt my blood run cold. My eyes flicked back to the mirror, searching, looking for any sign, any clue. But there was nothing there, nothing I could see. I turned forward again, barely able to breathe. My pulse was jackhammering in my skull. Sweat trickled down my spine. I started the engine again. It sputtered, once, twice, then roared to life like it had never stopped. I was done creeping, done hesitating. My foot slammed the gas pedal and the car lurched forward. But the whispering, it didn't stop. And whatever had been in the trees, it kept pace. I tried to shake the feeling off. I pushed the accelerator harder, eyes glued to the road ahead. The trees closed in tighter, but I didn't care anymore. All I wanted was to leave, to get out. But no matter how fast I drove, no matter how far I went, that whispering, that thing, was still with me. And I knew, deep down, that it wasn't done with me. Not yet. I drove like hell. Didn't matter that the road was barely wide enough for a bicycle in some places, or that branches kept raking the sides of my car like claws. I floored it, pressing the gas so hard my foot ached, trying to outrun whatever the hell had been following me in those trees. The headlights bounced wildly off the gnarled trunks, making the shadows twist and stretch like things with minds of their own. My knuckles were white on the wheel, and my eyes flicked between the rearview mirror, the windshield and the side window, over and over, like a loop I couldn't stop. The world outside blurred into a rush of dark shapes and flickers of movement, but I could never quite catch a clear glimpse of what was there. Just flashes, a pale arm, a dragging limb. Sometimes, for a fraction of a second, I'd see its reflection. In the mirror, long black fingers pressed against tree bark, a twisted grin with too many teeth, eyes like busted headlights that glowed but never blinked. It wasn't chasing me, it was escorting me, guiding me deeper into whatever nightmare I'd found myself in. The trees began to thin out, the road widening slightly, smoothing out. It felt like the oppressive weight of the forest was lifting, but I didn't dare relax. My hands were still shaking on the wheel, and my breath was too fast, too shallow. It was like my body knew something I didn't, something worse than I could understand. Something was still out there, still with me. And then, through the trees ahead, I saw something. Lights, glowing red, flickering against the black backdrop of the forest. At first, I thought it might be another mirage, another illusion the woods had conjured up to lure me in deeper. But no, this was real. A neon sign buzzed loudly in the distance, the letters flashing in and out, the kind of sign you'd see in a ghost town or maybe in one of those cheesy horror movies. The sign said, "Motel, nothing else, just that." Big, bold letters in flickering red neon like it was struggling to stay alive. Below it was a smaller sign that read, "Vacancy," which, considering the god-awful situation I was in, felt like a cruel joke. But it was the final message beneath that caught my eye. It said no exit. I didn't process it at first. My brain was too fried, still trying to put together the madness of what was happening. I was here. The sign was there. My brain was desperate for something familiar, something real. I was too tired to question it. I just wanted out, and the motel, however wrong it felt, looked like the only chance for rest, for answers, for something. I pulled into the lot. Why? Hell if I know. Maybe some tiny part of me hoped I could find a phone, some directions, or even someone who could say, "Oh yeah, exit 0? Happens all the time." Yeah, like that was going to happen. The engine clicked off with a finality that made my chest tighten. I sat there for a few seconds, just staring at the flickering sign. The night felt thicker here somehow. The air was heavy with mildew, and something else I couldn't quite name. Burnt plastic, maybe. The kind of smell you get when a building's been abandoned for too long, but the ghosts of the past still linger in the corners. Then something strange happened. My phone, which had been dead to the world for the last couple of hours, suddenly came to life. It buzzed once, then twice, and there it was, full signal. I snatched it up, eyes wide with disbelief. I had no service before, no bars, not even a whiff of connection. Now I was back online like the last hour never happened. I opened the map. It showed my little blue dot, but the map itself, it wasn't right. It was just grey, no roads, no towns, no names. Just one faded label floating in the middle of the empty screen. "You are here," and underneath that, in smaller font, "Exit 0. I dropped the phone almost like I'd been burned by it. My fingers were trembling and my throat felt like it was closing up. What the hell was going on? Exit 0. I'd seen it on the sign, but I didn't think it was real. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the doorway of the motel office, a middle-aged guy, skinny, lanky, grey overalls, his skin pale in the dim glow of the neon lights. He was bald on top, his face gaunt, eyes too wide. He looked wrong, like someone who was trying too hard to look human, but wasn't quite getting it right. His smile was too stretched, his movements too fluid, too loose. I couldn't place it. Something was off, but I couldn't figure out what. He waved. I didn't wave back. He didn't seem to mind. He took a few slow steps forward, making his way to my car with that strange, loose way of walking, like his bones weren't quite in the right places. There was a wrongness to his gait, like his joints weren't working properly, like his skin didn't fit. The air around him seemed to ripple, distort, like he was somehow distorting the very fabric of reality itself. He stopped about 10 feet from the car, then leaned in. "Long drive?" he asked, his voice pleasant, normal even. Too normal considering everything that had happened. But his eyes, they were hungry, like he was starving and I was the only meal in sight. I forced a smile and said, "Yeah, got a little lost." Wayne chuckled. It wasn't a real laugh, not quite. More like something rehearsed. "Happens all the time. Place draws folks in. You'll get used to it." I frowned, confused. Used to what? He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a whisper that sent a shiver up my spine. "The quiet, the woods, the way time works here, it's different." Then, without missing a beat, he added, "And they like it when you stay a while." I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. Wayne handed me a room key. No card, no modern amenities. Just an old-fashioned brass key with a plastic tag dangling from it. The tag read, "Room 103. "You'll rest better with the curtains closed," he said cryptically, his voice still dripping with that forced friendliness. Then he turned and started, walking back toward the office, whistling a tune that didn't have a melody. A sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. I stared at the key in my hand. It was warm. Too warm. Like someone had been holding it just moments before. It felt like it had absorbed the energy of whoever had touched it, and now that energy was in my hand, pressing against my skin. I should have driven off. Should have thrown it in reverse, floored it. hit the trees if I had to. Anything to get out of there, but I didn't. I walked to room 103, and behind every door I passed, I heard something breathing. Not just the sound of air moving. No, this was something deeper, something more alive. A slow rhythmic breath, like someone was waiting for me to make the wrong move. The hairs on my arms stood up. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else, but I knew, in the deepest part of my gut, that I wasn't alone. And when I reached room 103, the door creaked open on its own. There was no one there. But the room wasn't empty. It was waiting. The door to room 103 groaned like it hadn't been touched in years. The wood was heavy, swollen from the moisture in the air, and I had to shoulder it open, feeling it resist like it had a mind of its own. Inside, dust, stale air. The kind of motel room you only stay in when you've got no better options and something's chasing you, literally or metaphorically. 2 twin beds with the same faded, puke-brown floral comforters, as though they were plucked from the last decade and never cleaned. A tiny CRT TV bolted to the wall, the screen cracked, flickering on and off. The bathroom light in the corner was buzzing, flickering behind a cracked door. It smelled like bleach, old cigarettes, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like blood, and the curtains, thick, heavy, pulled tight across the window like a bandage. I didn't want to touch them, didn't want to even get close to that window. Wayne's words still rang in my ears. "You'll rest better with the curtains closed." Yeah, bet I would. I tossed the brass room key on the nightstand, my fingers lingering over it for a moment longer than I intended. The metal felt too warm in my hand, like someone had just been holding it. I sat down on the bed nearest the door, my legs feeling like lead. The silence in the room was unnatural, like the world outside had been swallowed whole, leaving nothing but this hollow space. There was no hum of an air conditioner, no chirp of crickets, no rustle of wind against the walls, just the occasional creak, like the room was breathing, or watching. I tried the TV, flicking the knob to turn it on. Static filled the screen, a white noise storm that made my stomach churn. I turned the volume up, just to drown out the silence. And that's when I realized something else, the static. It was sinking, rhythmic, almost like breathing in, out, steady, unearthly. Like there was something behind the static, something listening. I slammed the power button off, heart pounding. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back, but I didn't know what to. My phone was still dead to the world. I opened the map app, and the same empty grey screen greeted me, that horrifying label still floating on top. "You are here." I tapped out a message to my mom, my brother, anyone. Anyone who might just see it, even if it took hours for the message to go through. But nothing. No response. My fingers trembled as I stared at the blinking cursor, wondering why I even thought it would work. The screen glitched. For a split second, the display flickered and my phone's camera app popped up on its own. I didn't know why I opened it. Maybe I thought I was just going crazy, but I flipped it to selfie mode. Don't ask me why. Maybe I just needed to see myself. Maybe I needed to see something normal. And I did. Kind of. My face looked the same. I had dark circles under my eyes. From lack of sleep, a little stubble, but there I was, still me. But behind me, in the screen, just for a split second, something moved. Not a person, though. It wasn't quite like a person, more like a smudge. A heat ripple in the shape of a man, standing in the corner by the bathroom. The air in the room seemed to bend around him. I blinked and looked up at the room, heart leaping in my chest. Nothing. I spun around, staring hard at the corner where I'd seen it. The bathroom door stood slightly ajar, the light flickering dimly from the other side, and that's when I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was like the room itself had gone still, as though everything was holding its breath, waiting for me to move, waiting for me to acknowledge it. Another knock, louder this time, not urgent, not frantic, just patient, as though whatever or whoever was out there wasn't in any rush. They knew I was already trapped. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to open the curtain. But I had to. Something pulled me. Something deep in my gut whispered that I had to. I took one slow step toward the window. I heard my heartbeat pounding in my ears as the air in the room thickened. With dread, my feet felt heavy like they were moving through water, and with each step my body screamed at me to turn around and run. And then I heard it. A whisper, right next to my ear. "Don't!" I froze. The voice, it was me, my voice. But it wasn't. Coming from my mouth, it was like the air itself was speaking. "Don't open it," I spun around. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. The room was empty, but the reflection in the cracked TV screen, it was still there. My reflection was staring out the window, even though I had turned away. Even though I was standing in the middle of the room, staring back at the empty space where I'd just been, I was still looking out that window. Even though I hadn't moved, I stumbled back, panic rising in my throat. The room felt like it was closing in. I ran into the bathroom, splashing, cold water on my face, trying to ground myself. The light flickered above me, faster now, like a strobe, making the whole world around me flash in and out of existence. And that's when I saw it. Quick flashes in the mirror, almost like a stop-motion film. Me, again, then something behind. Me closer, grinning. My blood froze in my veins. I slammed the bathroom light off, my legs shaking uncontrollably as I backed into the bedroom. The knocks had stopped. The room felt almost empty, but not empty. The tension had shifted like a loaded gun waiting to go off. And the curtain? It twitched. A slight movement, like someone tapping it from the other side with long fingers. Stepped back. My hands were shaking, my breath ragged, chest tight. Then my phone buzzed again. One notification. New image received. My stomach dropped. I hadn't taken any pictures. I opened it, hesitating, knowing deep down that I didn't want to see whatever was on the other side of that screen. It was a picture of me lying in the bed, sleeping, in this room. The photo was taken from outside the window, and I wasn't alone in the bed. There was something next to me, tall, thin, too long to be human. Its face was pressed up against mine, its grin stretching, unnaturally wide, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. I recognized that grin, it was Wayne's, but the teeth, too many, too sharp, too wrong. That's when the doorknob started to turn, slowly, like someone didn't need to rush, because they knew I had nowhere to go. And the curtain? It began to rise. Not the natural sway of wind or the creak of an old building shifting. No, this was something else. It moved like fingers pulling it up inch by inch, revealing the dark shapes outside, revealing the things that had been waiting for me all along. The curtain continued its slow, deliberate rise. Inch by inch, it moved. As if guided by unseen fingers, the air in the room felt thick, heavy. My heart thundered in my chest, but my legs refused to move. I wanted to run, wanted to slam the door, wanted to do anything, but something kept me frozen, trapped in place. The door handle twitched again, this time just a little more, as if it had a life of its own, pulling and turning, then halting, turning back. A twisted game was being played on me. Somewhere in the depths of my mind, a small voice whispered, "It's now or never." I backed up toward the far wall, my eyes flicking from the curtain, now halfway lifted, to the door. The curtain's rise revealed the same scene as before, the parking lot, the dull red glow from the motel sign, my car sitting quietly in the lot. Nothing had changed. Too normal. Too normal. But the glass of the window, it was fogged up. Like someone had just breathed on it from outside, leaving behind a misty imprint. Then, as though some invisible hand had been tracing letters on the glass, they appeared, L-E-A-V-E, and below that, T-O-O-L-A-T-E. The words burned into my mind, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't move, I couldn't blink. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet stayed glued to the floor, my hands cold as ice. The door, which I had locked just minutes ago, clicked open. No creak, no jarring. Movement. Just a soft, polite click, as if someone had been waiting for this moment. Wayne stood there, but it wasn't Wayne anymore. The figure in the doorway had the same overalls, the same bald head, but his face was wrong. His skin sagged unnaturally. His eyes were too far apart. His mouth stretched too wide. That grin, his grin, had expanded beyond human comprehension. It was almost as if someone had used a box cutter and forced his face into a permanent smile. And the worst part? He didn't step inside. He just waited. He raised one arm and slowly his bony finger pointed down the hall. I followed his gaze, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every door along the hallway, from rooms 101 to 110, was wide open now, and standing in the shadows of each room were figures, tall, human-shaped, motionless, silent, watching me. Wayne cocked his head to one side, his grin somehow widening even further. "Time to check out," he said, his voice soft, almost playful. I felt my chest constrict. I backed toward the bathroom, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would break through my ribs. My hand brushed the nightstand in panic, and without thinking I grabbed the brass motel key. Room 103, I held it up like a weapon, something, anything that might defend me. Wayne's grin faltered, just for a second. Then, like a predatory animal, he lunged. I don't remember the exact moment I screamed or slammed the bathroom door shut behind me, but I do remember locking it with shaking hands, the metallic click echoing in the silence, and then the lights. They turned red, not just the bulbs, the light itself. The entire room became soaked in an eerie blood-red glow, like the walls themselves were bleeding. The mirror in front of me was now covered in handprints, real handprints, inside the glass. Not reflections, hands clawing and scraping, desperate to escape. And then the voices started. Not whispers, screams. "Help me. He's still out there. It never ends. Don't sleep." One voice was my own. I pressed my back to the sink, my skin prickling as I clutched the motel key tighter. My blood mixed with the sweat on my palms, but I couldn't let go. I couldn't. If I did, thump. The door behind me, the one I had locked, began to shudder. Thump. Slow. Heavy. Thump. With each hit, the room vibrated. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the mirror cracked down the middle, the fracture spreading like lightning across glass. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I backed into the sink, pressing myself as far into the corner as I could. The thumping continued. Each strike against the door rattled my bones, sending waves of terror crashing over me. The mirror? The cracks were growing. They weren't just fractures anymore. It was like the glass was warping. Something was inside. It pushing against it, pressing to get out, and then it stopped. Silence, but it wasn't the calm I had hoped for. It wasn't peace. No, this silence felt thick, suffocating. The air around me pressed in, the weight of it unbearable. Then from the other side of the door, Wayne's voice came. Soft, gentle. "You left your lights on." The words broke something inside me. My mind teetered on the edge of disbelief, my sanity unraveling as I tried to process the sheer absurdity of it. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream or cry, but what I did know was this. The key in my hand was the only thing that felt real. My scream tore through the silence. "What do you want?" The answer was soft. A lullaby. To welcome you, and... Then the bathroom door flew open. But it wasn't the motel anymore, it was the trees, the thick, oppressive forest that I had driven through. Only now they were inside. They had invaded. Branches snaked through the walls, growing from the ceiling, from the floor, wrapping around everything. The walls were splitting open as the forest pushed its way through. Leaves scattered the floor. The smell of damp earth filled the air. The trees reached for me like fingers. Branches twisted and slithered, contorting into grotesque shapes. One of them shot forward, curling around my ankle, cold and relentless, pulling me into the dark. Gasped, trying to kick free, but the grip was too strong. And then, before I was fully pulled under, I saw it. The motel key. Room 103. It glowed red in my hand, its brass warmth burning into my skin. Then everything went black. The key. It burned brighter in the darkness, and I heard a whisper, a promise, a welcome that would never end. I woke, up with a mouthful of dirt. My lungs burned as I gasped for air, choking on dry, gritty earth that scraped against my throat. It took me a second to realize what was happening, what had happened. The forest was pressing in all around me, a dark, tangled labyrinth of trees and roots, suffocating me like a coffin built out of bark and branches. My head was spinning, my body stiff and bruised like I'd been dragged through the woods for miles. Something was wrong. I tried to sit up, but my muscles screamed in protest. I could feel the deep, burning cut on my left shin, searing with the kind of pain that told me it wasn't just a scrape. It was something worse. Something had torn into me, and I didn't know what. A branch? A claw? I didn't want to think about it. I looked around, trying to take stock of my surroundings. I wasn't in the motel anymore. The road was gone. The woods had swallowed me whole. The trees towered above, their black bark thick and twisted, growing around me like a living thing. There was no sky, not really, just a grey twilight expanse that stretched forever, as if the sun had forgotten how to rise or set. There was no clear horizon, no escape in sight. Only the trees, endless, oppressive trees. The air was thick, suffocating. Every breath felt like it was laced with dust and decay. I looked down and noticed my car keys were gone. The weight of them wasn't in my pockets. I felt the loss like a punch to the gut, as if the world had ripped something from me that I wouldn't get back. And then through the stillness of the woods I heard it, a whistle. That same damn tune that Wayne had been humming. It floated through the trees, soft and melodic, almost like a lullaby. I didn't want to follow it. I didn't want to do anything really, but I couldn't stay there either. Something inside me, something primal, urged me to move. So I walked. For what felt like hours, I wandered, my legs barely keeping up with the pace of my thoughts. The trees around me didn't change. They stood in the same formation, their limbs twisted into grotesque shapes, their shadows long and haunting. There were no animals, no birds calling, no wind rustling the leaves. Only an eerie hum that seemed to pulse from the earth itself, a heartbeat of the forest. Eventually I stumbled into a clearing. It was small, almost unnaturally so, and right in the center of the clearing was a road sign. Green metal, faded. With age and the weather, but the words were clear. Exit 0I blinked. My head spun, the whistle had stopped. In the distance I saw it, the road. The cracked, broken two-lane road that had led me to the motel in the first place. And there it was, my car parked right in the middle of it. The door was wide open, the headlights off, like I just left it there and walked away. But how could that be? I had been in the forest, buried, trapped. I limped toward the car, my knees shaking, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't stop to ask questions. I didn't think. I opened the door, sat down, and without hesitation, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life like it had never stopped. I didn't question it. I didn't dare. I slammed the car into drive and floored it, peeling away from the forest. The road twisted and curved, serpentine, like it was pulling me back, like it was trying to drag me into the trees. But I pushed the accelerator harder, the wheels screeching as I tore down the road. And then, after what felt like an eternity, I saw it. Lights. Real lights. Red and blue flashing. A gas station. The relief I felt was immediate, overwhelming. It was as if the world had tilted back to normal, real normal. A gas station with a soda machine and a car wash and a teenager behind the counter, microwaving burritos like it was the most mundane thing in the world. I slammed the car into park and jumped out, stumbling like I hadn't walked in years. The kid behind the counter barely looked up from his microwaving task. He glanced at me like I was just another tired traveler who'd been through the motions of life and was now in need of some rest. "Long night?" he asked, his voice flat, like he'd said it 1,000 times. I didn't answer. I just stumbled inside, my hands shaking, my body broken. I couldn't think straight. The reality of everything that had happened felt unreal, like a dream or a nightmare. Without a word, the kid handed me a bottle of water, and I gulped it down like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I didn't even think to thank him. "Come from the west?" he asked. I nodded. Slowly. Too slowly. Take exit 0, he pressed. My blood froze in my veins, my heart stuttered. You know about it? I managed to ask, my voice shaky. The kid shrugged, as if it was just another fact of life around here. Everybody around here's heard of it. Only opens for certain people. You're lucky, man. Lucky? I echoed, confused, but the fear was creeping up my spine, spreading like cold fingers. He smiled, a tight, uncomfortable smile. Most folks who take exit 0 don't come back. I staggered out of there, barely holding myself together. I didn't sleep, couldn't. The adrenaline kept me going, driving until the sun finally began to rise. And when it did, the first thing I saw was my reflection in the rearview mirror. My reflection. But it wasn't me. My reflection smiled at me. I didn't smile back, because my reflection was still wearing the motel's key around its neck. Room 103. I checked my pockets. Nothing, no key, no trace of it. I even rifled through the glove compartment, the seat cushions everywhere. But it was gone. Vanished. I didn't know if I was going crazy or if the key had been some kind of trick. But the whistle? It still lingers. Sometimes just faintly, like a distant memory, drifting through the air when I'm alone. I don't drive at night anymore. Not ever. Because sometimes, when I'm passing a long stretch of empty highway and there's no one else around, I swear I see it. A sign in the dark, exit 0 just for a second. And I know that if I blink, if I let myself think about it for too long, I'll be back there. And next time, I don't think I'll get out. You ever see something that makes your brain stop cold? Like your eyes are telling you one thing, but the rest of you is screaming, "Don't look any closer." That's what it felt like for Dan when he saw the blood. Yeah, actual blood, oozing. From the back of his trailer. Just a slow, sticky trickle coming right from the seam in the cargo doors. Like the freight inside had started bleeding, and the worst part, he couldn't open it. Dan Walker wasn't new to trucking. Hell, he'd been on the road longer than some of the rest stops had been standing. Old school guy, beat-up ball cap, steel, thermos full of gas station coffee, and a healthy distrust of GPS. People like him didn't spook easy. You spend 20 years hauling everything from refrigerators to fireworks. You learn to shrug off weird noises and strange smells. But this was different. It started about 200 miles east of El Paso. He'd picked up a load from a sketchy little warehouse, one of those back road depots where nobody makes eye contact and everything smells like metal and mildew. He didn't ask questions. The paperwork was all in order and the manifest was clean, except the cargo wasn't labeled. Just said, "Special handling sealed until delivery," which, okay, wasn't unheard of. Sometimes it was high-value stuff, medical, equipment, sensitive tech. Dan had seen worse. Still, the dock guys seemed nervous, too quiet. One of them kept glancing at the trailer like it was about to explode. Dan had laughed it off, signed the slip, and hit the road. The first stretch of the haul was uneventful. Just wide-open Texas emptiness, tumbleweeds crossing the blacktop like they were on a suicide mission. Music low, window cracked, cruise control on. But around mile marker 403, the smell hit him, something sour, like rotten meat, or a wet dog that had been locked in a hot car. He rolled up the window, checked his air vents, thought maybe a skunk. Had taken a piss somewhere under the chassis. Didn't think too hard about it, until he stopped at a rest area just past the New Mexico line. He wanted to stretch his legs, grab a snack, and maybe splash some water on his face. But when he rounded the back of the trailer, there it was, a thin line of blood, dripping from the seam where the two rear doors met, running down the chrome like sweat. He stared at it, frowned, pulled out a rag from the cab and wiped at it. It's smeared, dark red, no mistaking it. "Oh, hell," he muttered. "Probably some roadkill got flung up there, right?" Something hit the axle, maybe sprayed up onto the back, but when he wiped again, the smear kept coming, like it wasn't on the door, like it was coming from inside. Dan tried the latch. Locked. Weird. He checked the cargo manifest again. No padlock. Mentioned. No electronic seal. He tugged harder. Nothing. Like the doors were welded shut. He circled the trailer, checked the undercarriage. Everything looked fine, except there was more blood now. Little trickles sliding from under the frame. It hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. He called dispatch, tried to play it casual. "Hey, Y'all got anything on this load that would, leak? There was silence on the other end, then a voice, Barry from Night Dispatch. Always sounded like he was halfway through a sandwich. Nah, shouldn't be. Manifest says dry cargo, no liquids, you got a busted axle. Dan hesitated. No, trailer's locked tight, won't budge. Try the override key? There is no override. Another pause. Well, don't break it open, that load's marked. Sensitive, maybe there's a seal you missed. I'll flag it, but just roll on for now. Dan stared at the growing puddle under the trailer. Yeah, he said slowly. Okay. He hung up. Didn't move. Not for a long time. Back in the cab, he sat stiff, gripping the wheel tighter than he meant to. He felt watched, not by people, not by animals, just watched, like something behind him was breathing against the trailer wall, slow and heavy, waiting for the miles to vanish. That night he parked in a gravel lot behind a shuttered diner, the kind of place where the only thing left standing was a rusted Pepsi machine and an old neon sign that buzzed even when it was off. Dan didn't sleep. He tried. Kicked back in the sleeper cab, closed his eyes, but every time he drifted off, thump from the trailer, screech like nails on metal. He grabbed a flashlight, climbed out. The trailer sat quiet, still, moonlight glinting off the doors. He clicked on the beam. The blood was gone. Not wiped, not dried. Just vanished, and then, just as he turned back toward the cab, he heard it, a whisper, muffled. From inside the trailer, a single word so faint he barely caught it. Driver. Dan froze, didn't breathe, didn't move. Then, suddenly, he ran. Climbed. Into the cab, slammed the door, locked it. He drove until dawn without stopping once, and that's just the first night. There's more, way more. Whatever was in that trailer, it wasn't cargo. And Dan, he wasn't just hauling freight anymore. He was carrying a secret with blood on its breath. Dan didn't stop until he hit Arizona. He didn't eat, didn't blink for long, just kept the wheels turning like if he slowed down, something might catch up. The sun was rising behind him, painting the desert in that strange, washed-out gold that makes everything look like it's been bleached and forgotten. But even with the light behind him, he couldn't shake that feeling, the one that settled in his spine and refused to leave, like the trailer was heavier now, not in weight, but in presence. He finally pulled into a small truck stop west of Holbrook, one of those half-forgotten places with cracked pavement, a flickering open sign, and a diner that smelled like burned bacon and expired coffee creamers. Dan parked the rig way out at the edge of the lot, away from the other trucks. He didn't want company, he didn't want witnesses. The trailer was quiet now, too quiet. He climbed down, made his way to the diner, and found a booth near the back. Coffee tasted like scorched dirt, but he drank it anyway. He needed to think. He pulled out the manifest again. Paper copy. 2 pages. Everything was standard. The shipper was some company he'd never heard of, Viridian Logistics, based out of Nevada. Recipient was just an address. Eagle Ridge Medical Storage, Flagstaff. No contact name, no phone, no item description, just that weird stamp. Special handling. Do not open under any circumstances. Dan frowned. He'd seen plenty of do not open warnings, but never one that aggressive, and certainly never one where opening the trailer wasn't even an option. He flipped the second page over just out of habit. Blank, except now, in the bottom. Right corner, barely visible like someone had used disappearing ink. There was a faint set of words. Do not trust the voices. Dan dropped the page like it had burned him. He wiped his hands on his jeans, heart pounding. He knew that wasn't there before. Back at the truck, things felt off. You know how you can just feel when something in your house has been moved? Like a chair isn't quite where you left it, or a door's open just a few inches wider than it should be. That's what the trailer felt like now. He stepped around back, ran his hand along the edge of the doors, still locked, still sealed, but the metal was cold. Not early morning cold, icebox cold, and when he pressed his palm flat against it, he felt something press back, like someone's hand. But wrong, too large, too slow. He jerked his hand away, breath caught in his throat. And then it started again. Drip, drip, dark red lines forming along the bottom seam, thicker this time. smelling, like rust and rot. Dan stumbled back, eyes wide, looked around. No one saw. Or if they did, they weren't saying anything. He grabbed his phone and called dispatch again. Got a different guy this time. Some kid named Raoul, who sounded like he was more interested in scrolling TikTok than dealing. They were the freaked-out trucker. Dude, if it's bleeding, just file a maintenance ticket when you hit delivery. You are going to delivery, right? Dan gritted his teeth. Not until someone tells me what the hell I'm hauling. Click. Call ended. Back in the cab, he tried calling the sender. Viridian Logistics. Number disconnected. He searched the address. Satellite. View showed an empty warehouse surrounded by chain-link fence and dead weeds. No trucks, no people, no company sign. Like the place had been abandoned for years. He slammed the dashboard with his palm. What the hell is going on? He started the engine, checked the mirror, and nearly jumped out of his skin. A face, pressed against the inside of the trailer's small, foggy vent, pale, wide-eyed. Mouth open in a silent scream. It vanished the second he blinked, gone like steam, on glass. Dan sat frozen, pulse hammering in his ears. He leaned out of the cab, scanned the trailer. No sign of movement. But now the sides were stained. Long, dark handprints smeared across the white aluminum, as if something had been pounding. To get out, and that whisper, it came again. So quiet it was more in his head than his ears. Let us out. Driver, please. We're not supposed to be in here. Dan floored it. He didn't care what was inside. Didn't care about the money, the drop-off, or his rep. He just wanted to get rid of that trailer. But here's the thing. Every time he passed an exit ramp, he'd see something. Someone. A shadowy figure standing motionless at the end of the off-ramp, arms at their sides, head tilted, watching. Him different faces each time, old man, little girl. Woman in a hospital gown. All of them staring. All of them bleeding from their eyes. And as he passed, they'd whisper something only he could hear. We're still locked in. You're keeping us here. Why won't you open the door? Dan almost crashed trying to swerve off the road near Winslow, but the brakes failed. No kidding, just failed. The truck kept rolling. Even when he stomped the pedal to the floor, the speed climbed. The engine roared, and all the while that damn trailer rumbled behind him like it was laughing. He finally got control back hours later, somehow, pulled off at an abandoned way station, killed the engine, climbed out on shaking legs, and sat down. On the pavement with his head in his hands. He didn't know what was real anymore. Didn't know how much of it was hallucination or nightmare or something far worse. But he did know this. The trailer wasn't just locked. It was locked for a reason, and if something was inside begging to get out, it wasn't because it wanted help. It was because it wanted a host. Dan sat in the driver's seat, hands still trembling, the cold desert wind hitting his face as he stared at the dead weight of the trailer behind him. He felt like he'd been stuck in some endless loop, a fever dream he couldn't wake up from. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the way station. No one around, no other trucks, no cars, just the eerie silence that clung to the place like an unwelcome guest. He tried to breathe, tried to think, tried to ignore the gnawing panic that kept crawling up his spine like 100 tiny fingers. But then his eyes locked onto the trailer again, to feet, 13 feet tall. It should have been just another standard load. Yet the longer he stared at it, the more the trailer felt like a living, breathing thing. The aluminum shell, the seams, they seemed to pulse with every beat of his heart. Like there was something alive inside, just waiting to get out. Dan stood up, hands on his hips, the hairs on the back of his neck standing at attention. He knew what he had to do. He had to open it, but every fiber of his being screamed not to. Every instinct told him that whatever was locked inside that trailer, it wasn't just a load, it was a trap, a prison, a mistake. But maybe the biggest mistake was not opening it in the first place. The trailer felt even colder now. The blood, he'd forgotten about it, but the smell was still there, lingering in the air, clinging to the edges of his memory. He couldn't let it go. Not anymore. Something had shifted in him. Something had cracked wide open when he saw those faces, those empty faces, staring at him from the off-ramp. He had to know. He had to see what was inside. He walked around to the back, flashlight in hand, shining it across the trailer's metal skin. The blood had stopped seeping for now, but Dan couldn't shake the image of that wet, sickening drip. He reached for the locks. His fingers froze just before they touched the latch. There was a sound, a soft scratching noise coming from inside. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to make his throat close up tight. He pulled his hand away and took a few steps back, his heart hammering in his chest. The scratching continued, growing louder. Thump, thump, thump. The trailer door began to vibrate, a low rumble like something big was trying to break through. Dan backed up further, barely daring to breathe, and then the noise stopped. A silence so thick and heavy it felt like the air itself was pressing against him, suffocating him. He glanced over at the rig. His hands were shaking. Sweat beaded on his forehead. And that's when he heard the voice again. It was softer now, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. "Driver, please, you can't leave us here." It was a woman's voice. Dan's stomach dropped to his feet. He wanted to run, to drive, to get the hell out of there, but he couldn't move. The voice, it wasn't in his head. It was coming from inside the trailer. He was sure of it now. He turned back to the trailer. His hand hovered over the latch again, but it didn't seem like he could unlock it. Something was holding it shut. Like there was a force, a presence, that didn't want him to know what was on the other side, but he couldn't turn away. Not this time. He grabbed the lock and twisted it. It clicked open. The door swung outward with a loud creak, the stench hitting him all at once, a mixture of rot and something sweeter, the kind of smell you only get from something that's been dead too long. Dan stepped back, his flashlight trembling in his grip as he shone it inside, and that's when his heart stopped. Nothing. At first, it seemed like there was nothing inside, just empty space. But then, as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw it. Lying at the far end of the trailer, a pile of blackened rags, crumpled like they were discarded. And the smell. It was worse now. Like something was seeping out from inside the pile. Dan swallowed hard, forcing himself to take a step closer. He didn't know what he was expecting. Maybe a body. Maybe the source of the voices. But what he saw next froze him. At the top of the pile there was a hand. A pale hand sticking out, fingers twisted at impossible angles, the skin mottled and pale. It was trembling. No, not trembling, it was moving. Slowly. In a way that was wrong. Dan's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to scream, to run, but he couldn't move. And that's when the hand twitched, and then the whole pile shifted. Something crawled out of the shadows, a shape. No figures. A dozen hands, grabbing at the edges of the trailer, pulling themselves forward. Pale bodies, bruised and broken, rising from the pile, eyes wide open but lifeless. Their mouths hung open, slack and dripping with dark, sticky liquid. They were dead. But they weren't. Dan's stomach churned as the figures rose to their feet, their legs stiff and jerking, and one of them, no, the first one, looked right at him, a woman. Her face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow but filled with rage. She opened her mouth, and this time, there was no whisper. "You shouldn't have opened it." The words were so loud, so commanding, that Dan felt them rattle his bones. The door slammed shut. Dan staggered back, heart racing, breath coming in sharp gasps. He stared at the locked doors for a long, long time. The figures were inside now. Those things. They had been in there this whole time, waiting for someone to open the door, for someone to let them out. But it wasn't over. No. Dan didn't know it yet, but the worst part was just beginning. The voices came again, louder now, more frantic. And in the stillness of the desert night, Dan heard one final chilling line. "You're one of us now." Dan couldn't breathe. The world seemed to collapse around him as the words echoed in his head. "You're one of us now." His vision blurred, his knees buckled, and he leaned heavily against the trailer. Sweat poured down his face, making his skin feel like it was crawling. He stared at the doors, his pulse thumping in his ears. The last thing he wanted to do was open them again. But the voices inside the trailer weren't done. They were scratching and scraping, their whispers thick with desperation. He thought about running, thought about driving away. and leaving it all behind, but deep down he knew that wasn't an option. He couldn't escape, not now. Not with whatever it was inside the trailer. The desert stretched out before him like a vast, empty graveyard. No lights, no cars, no people. Just the dark, oppressive silence of the wait station. Dan grabbed the flashlight from the truck and swung it toward the back of the trailer, trying to focus, trying to gather his thoughts. But it was useless. His mind kept racing, each heartbeat pounding in his skull. He had to face it. He had to know what was inside that trailer. With shaking hands, he grabbed the latch again, his fingers frozen as he turned it. The door creaked open, revealing the darkness inside. For a moment, there was nothing. The blood had stopped seeping from the seams. The smell of rot was gone. It was just empty. But Dan knew better than to trust the silence. He stepped inside, shining his flashlight across the trailer. The beam danced across the metal walls, but there was still nothing. No bodies, no blood, no movement. It was as if everything had disappeared. The figures, the hands, the woman's face, gone. Dan's breath was shallow, his legs trembling beneath him. He moved slowly, every step feeling like an eternity. Then he heard it, a low, guttural sound, like a low growl or a hum. It was coming from beneath the floor. He dropped to his knees and shone the light through the gaps in the metal floor. There was nothing there, but the noise persisted, growing louder, closer. Dan's throat tightened as he realized that the sound wasn't coming from the floor, it was coming from inside him. Suddenly, the walls seemed to close in, the air growing, thick and suffocating. His chest tightened as he struggled to draw breath. He was suffocating. The trailer, the cargo. It wasn't just a load, it was alive. Dan's vision swam, his body feeling like it was made of stone. He crawled to the back of the trailer, dragging himself along the cold floor, his fingers scraping against the metal. He couldn't move fast enough. He couldn't get away. Whatever was inside that trailer, it was inside him now too. The humming was louder now. It wasn't just in his head anymore, it was everywhere. A deep resonating vibration that shook the very air. He reached the back of the trailer and fumbled for the door. His fingers were slick with sweat, but he managed to pry it open just enough to slip out. As he stumbled into the night air, the sound stopped. The air cleared. For a brief moment, he thought he was free. But then he saw it. The figures, no, the things, were standing in front of the trailer. Pale and bloated, their eyes wide open but unseeing. They moved slowly, dragging their feet, their heads tilting unnaturally to the side. Their mouths hung open in a silent scream. Dan stepped back, his legs trembling. The thing that had been inside the trailer had moved into him. The woman's voice came again, louder this time, stronger, like it was right next to him. "It's too late. You're one of us now. Forever." Dan turned around, his breath catching in his throat, and then he saw it. The cargo. Not just the people, not just the twisted bodies that had once been human. There were other things, things that didn't belong in the world at all. Shapes that slithered and squirmed in the shadows, their forms too distorted to comprehend. They were alive, but not in any way Dan understood. Some were too big to fit inside the trailer. Some of them were so large, their limbs stretched and bent in unnatural ways, as though the metal walls themselves had been unable to contain them. Others were just eyes, hundreds of them, floating in the air like they were suspended by some unseen force, watching him. Dan stumbled backward, his heart racing. He turned to the rig, but it didn't matter. The engine wouldn't start, the key wouldn't turn. The trailer had hijacked everything. He felt the cold crawl up his spine, his body freezing as something else shifted inside him. Something darker. We are the cargo, and we are free now. The voice was not just in his head, it was in the wind, it was in his veins, in his blood. Dan collapsed to his knees, staring up at the sky. The moonlight seemed to twist and bend, the stars stretching into long skeletal shapes. His vision swirled. His chest felt heavy, like it was being crushed from the inside out. The cargo, the things in the trailer, they weren't finished with him. He was the cargo now, the next one in line, the next one to be consumed. A final, desperate scream tore from his throat, but it was too late. The trailer door slammed shut. The first thing Dan noticed when he opened his eyes was the smell. It was that same stench, the thick, rotting odor that seemed to have seeped into the very air. But this time it wasn't just the trailer. The smell was in him. The ground beneath him was cold, rough, asphalt, and yet it felt like he was lying on something soft, something wrong. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision, but the world around him was blurry, like he was seeing it through layers of fog. The truck. It was still there. His rig, the trailer. Everything was in the same place as before, but it was different now. He was different now. Something had changed. Dan pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady, like they didn't belong to him anymore. His hands trembled. As he reached out to steady himself against the side of the rig, the truck was running, but he hadn't turned it on. He was sure of that. The key, he hadn't turned it. Not since that moment when he'd been overwhelmed by the figures, the voices, the cargo, and yet here he was, inside the cab, his hands resting on the wheel, his foot pressed against the accelerator. Who was driving? He turned his head sharply to the right, and his breath caught in his throat. There, sitting beside him in the passenger seat, was a figure. At first it seemed like just another shadow. A trick of the light, maybe, but as his eyes focused, the shape became clearer. It was a woman, pale, her eyes wide and empty, like two dark voids. Her skin was paper-thin, stretched too tightly over her bones, and her mouth. It hung open, unnaturally wide, like she was in the middle of a scream. But no sound came out. Dan's blood ran cold. His heart began to race, and for a split second he thought he might faint. But the woman didn't move. Not at first. Then, slowly, she turned her head, her neck cracking loudly like dry twigs snapping underfoot. "You're one of us now," she whispered, her voice low and rasping. "You're part of the load." Dan recoiled, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. No, this couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But the woman's empty eyes never left his face. She was staring at him now, waiting. The truck lurched forward, taking off down the dark, desolate highway. Dan's foot was on the pedal, but he wasn't the one driving. He couldn't be. His hand twitched. His eyes darted around, looking for a way out. But there was nothing. He was trapped. "Where are we going?" he managed to croak, his throat dry. The words felt foreign, like they didn't even come from him. The woman didn't respond at first. She just kept staring ahead, her eyes unblinking. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered again, "Back. To the beginning. To the cargo." The air inside the cab grew thick and heavy, like it was suffocating him. The woman's presence seemed to fill every inch of the space. Her hollow stare bored into him, and the feeling of being watched grew unbearable, and the truck, it wasn't just driving, it was moving faster, faster than it should. The road stretched out before them in a blur, the lines on the asphalt barely visible. The engine roared like a beast, as if it were alive, hungry. Dan tried to look out the window, anything to break the suffocating pressure inside the truck. But the landscape around him was changing. The familiar desert highway had disappeared. The roads were winding, twisting, and suddenly they were surrounded by dense, shadowy trees, the kind that didn't belong in the desert, the kind that didn't belong in the world at all. The landscape seemed unnatural. The truck sped through the night, the woman beside him never moving. Her eyes locked on him, unblinking, waiting. "It's too late to run," she whispered again. "You're already part of the cargo." The weight of her words settled in his chest, cold and suffocating. Dan's thoughts were scrambled. His mind screamed at him to break free, to tear himself away from the wheel. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to be part of whatever nightmare this was. But the road was dragging him in. He could feel it now. The pull of the trailer, the cargo. It was pulling him in deeper, sucking him into its web. The weight in his chest grew heavier. With every mile, every moment that passed. And then he saw it, the lights, a small glowing sign in the distance, Eagle Ridge Medical Storage. Dan's heart lurched in his chest. He recognized the name from the manifest, but it couldn't be. Not like this. He slammed his foot on the brake, but the truck didn't slow down. The woman in the passenger seat didn't even flinch. She just stared at him, her hollow eyes reflecting the flashing lights ahead. "We're here," she whispered. The truck pulled into the lot, the tires screeching as they came to an abrupt stop in front of a massive, dilapidated building. The walls were covered in dark stains, the windows shattered, and the sign above the door had been torn away, leaving only a few rusted letters behind. Medical storage, but there was nothing medical about it. The place was dead. The woman in the passenger seat slowly turned to look at him, her mouth opened just slightly, as though she was about to speak. But no words came. Instead, she just stared at him, her lips stretched into a grotesque, silent smile. The door to the trailer was still sealed. But the scratching was back, scratching, pounding. It was louder now. The cargo was alive and it wanted out. Dan took a deep breath, his fingers trembling as he gripped the door handle. He knew what he had to do. He had no choice. The trailer door creaked open. The air in the cab was thick with the smell of death and the hum of the engine, which sounded louder than ever now. Dan's hands were trembling, but he knew what he had to do. The cargo was alive. It wanted out, and he had been the one to open the door, to release it, to become part of it. The woman in the passenger seat still sat motionless, her dead eyes boring into him. She was waiting, watching. The scratching, the gnawing, the pounding from the trailer's interior had grown deafening. Something was trying to escape, and Dan wasn't sure if he was more afraid of what would happen once the door was opened or the consequences of not opening it. The air outside was dead silent. Not a single animal, not a sound of traffic. Nothing. Just the squeal of the truck's tires on the gravel and the low growl of something hungry inside. Dan took another deep breath. His mouth was dry. He reached out, his fingers brushing the trailer door latch. It felt like an eternity, his hand hovering, shaking. "Do it," the woman whispered from beside him, her voice cold and distant. "You've come too far to stop now." For a brief moment, Dan thought he saw her smile, a grotesque stretched thing that didn't belong on a human face. But there was no turning back. He yanked the door open. The first thing he saw was the darkness. The trailer's interior was pitch black, the kind of black that felt oppressive. It was as though the darkness itself was alive, swallowing the light from the flashlight Dan had left on the floor. Then a figure stepped forward. At first, Dan thought it was just a trick of the light. Maybe it was one of the figures from before, the ones that had been inside the cargo. But no, this wasn't a human form, this was something else, a hulking mass of twisted limbs and tattered flesh, squirming in the darkness like some kind of malformed insect. Its body was a patchwork of different textures, skin stretched over unnatural bones, eyes glowing faintly beneath layers of pus-soaked tissue. It saw him, and it crawled toward him, faster than it had any right to. The trailer groaned as the thing slid out of the shadows, its long arms dragging along the floor with a sickening scrape. The ground beneath Dan seemed to tremble with the force of it, and the air grew heavier. The air felt thick with something wrong. Dan wanted to scream. He wanted to run. But his feet wouldn't move. His body felt like it was frozen in place. And then behind the first figure, another one appeared. And another and another. They were everywhere. Some were humanoid, bent at odd angles, their arms too long, their fingers too many. Others were grotesque combinations of limbs and faces, all stitched together with dark, wet threads. Their eyes were all wide open, all vacant but all watching. And in the back of the trailer, just beyond the writhing mass, he saw it. The cargo. It was a giant, a massive shape that filled up the entire back end of the trailer. A thing with no distinguishable features, just a writhing, pulsating mass of flesh and bone, its surface covered in slimy tendrils that seemed to move on their own. It was huge, too huge for the trailer, too huge for the world, and it was alive. Dan took a step backward, his body finally reacting to the horror in front of him. But the woman beside him, she was gone, vanished. His stomach churned, the overwhelming smell of rot filling his senses. He didn't know if he could take another step. The floor beneath him seemed to sway, the walls closing in. The creature at the front of the trailer, its mouth opened, not with sound, but with a sickening rip, as though its flesh was parting in order to speak. But the words that came out weren't words at all. It was something deeper, something older, a roar that vibrated through Dan's very soul. "We are the cargo. We are the load." The other creatures moved forward, their limbs twisting and jerking in unnatural patterns as they followed. Their leader. The trailer seemed to come alive with the sound of their crawling, the slithering of their movements. Dan stumbled backward, but they were faster than him. They were everywhere, their eyes locked on him. He could feel the cold, clammy touch of their skin brushing against him as they surrounded him. One of the creatures, no, it wasn't a creature. It was a woman's face, her skin stretched thin, blood dripping from the corner of her mouth. She reached out toward him, her fingers twitching. "You're part of us now." Her voice was a mix of desperation and hunger. Dan couldn't move. His body was frozen. His vision was clouding with darkness, the noise from the creatures building to a deafening crescendo. They were suffocating him. Then, something snapped. The truck jerked violently, the engine roaring as the trailer was thrown into motion. Dan's stomach lurched as the truck barreled forward at an impossible speed, the world around him a blur of twisted shadows and flickering lights. The creatures were still there, but they were no longer just in the trailer. They were in his mind, there. Whispers echoed in his ears. The low growl of their voices became a chant. "You're part of us now, forever." Dan's breath came in ragged gasps as the truck tore through the night, the road becoming a dark, endless void stretching out before them. But the darkness wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside him. And then, the truck came to a screeching halt. The trailer door slammed shut behind him, and the last thing Dan saw before everything went black was the flashing red lights of the rig's hazard lights. The road stretched on, empty and cold. The cargo had been unleashed.